The most feared man in New York City hadn't smiled in 3 years. 10 of the world's most beautiful women stood in his boardroom tonight, each one willing to do anything to capture his attention. He looked through every single one of them, until a clumsy waitress stumbled through the wrong door and nearly destroyed everything. What happened next silenced an entire city. If you've never seen power surrender to something real, stay until the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and let's begin.
Acheté.
The freight elevator had been broken since Tuesday. Nobody told Maisie Rowan that. She found out the hard way, standing in the service corridor on the 42nd floor of the Castelli Tower with 40 pounds of chafing dishes balanced across both arms, her left knee wedged against the wall, and the elevator doors refusing to open no matter how many times she jabbed the button with her elbow. The metal panel gave a low, sick groan. Something electrical clicked behind the wall. Then silence. Maisie exhaled through her nose. She'd been awake since 4 in the morning. Her feet had stopped sending pain signals around hour 6. They'd just gone numb, which she'd learned to accept as a small mercy. Her catering uniform, a white button-down and black slacks from a thrift store 3 blocks from her apartment in the Bronx, had a grease stain near the hip she'd tried to cover with her apron. The apron now smelled like the chicken broth she'd used to deglaze the pan while cooking her own lunch at 5 a.m. Motwon, a thermos of which she'd tucked into the lower shelf of the rolling cart, because tonight was going to be long, and she couldn't afford to buy food at whatever pretentious bar setup they were running on the 42nd floor. Her supervisor, a thin, perpetually sweating man named Gerald, had given her the assignment 3 days ago with the energy of someone handing her a grenade. Castelli Tower, Rooftop Hospitality Suite, DeLuca Hospitality Private Event. You do not speak to clients unless spoken to. You do not make eye contact with anyone in a suit that costs more than your rent. You show up, you set up, you pour, you disappear. What's the event? Above your pay grade. That's not an answer, Gerald. Above your pay grade. She'd found out anyway because Maisie Rowan had a habit of knowing things people assumed she was too unremarkable to discover. The DeLuca Hospitality Group was holding a private casting event for their new flagship restaurant, Casa Belladonna. 10 supermodels, international press, and the kind of closed-door meeting that generated more gossip in the fashion world than any runway show. The client was Roman Castelli himself. Maisie had Googled him once, briefly, the way you might glance at the sun. Enough to understand it, not enough to damage yourself. The search results came back in a cascade of photographs and careful language. Dark hair, dark eyes, early 30s but carrying something older in the set of his jaw and the stillness of his hands. The articles described him as a hospitality entrepreneur, an East Coast luxury developer, in the measured tone of publications that understood which subjects required careful handling. There were no criminal charges listed. There were also no quotes from anyone who claimed to know him personally. The elevator groaned again and did nothing. Maisie looked at the stairwell door. She looked at the 40 pounds of chafing dishes. She looked at the stairwell door again. Perfect, she said to no one. She shouldered through the door. But the 42nd floor's service corridor connected to the main hospitality suite through a galley kitchen that smelled of fresh paint and imported marble dust. The space had apparently been renovated twice in the last 18 months, according to the other catering staff who'd worked the Castelli Tower before. Maisie had not worked it before. She was covering a shift for Danny Purcell, who had called her at 6 a.m. claiming food poisoning, but whose Instagram story at 7 a.m. showed him at a Knicks game. She hadn't said anything because Danny owed her a shift from March, and she needed the $140. She pushed through the galley door into the main suite and stopped. The room was extraordinary in the way that spaces built to impress are always extraordinary, calculated to within an inch of its geometry, lit to make everyone inside it look like they were worth something. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the Manhattan skyline, now purple and gold in the early evening light. Low white tables arranged in a loose crescent, flower arrangements that probably cost more than her monthly rent. And the 10 women. They were already positioned around the room when Maisie entered through the service door, and she registered them the way you register a weather system, as something powerful and not entirely natural. Long-limbed, composed, dressed in the kind of deliberate simplicity that required an army of people and an obscene budget to achieve. A few of them were talking to each other in low voices. Two were on their phones. One was standing near the windows with her arms crossed, looking at the skyline as though she owned a portion of it. Maisie kept her head down and began setting up the chafing stations along the side wall. The room had maybe 40 people in it, including staff. Men in suits she didn't look at. A photographer adjusting lighting equipment near the far end. A woman with a clipboard and an earpiece moving between clusters of people with the focused energy of someone managing an event that could not afford to fail. Gerald appeared from somewhere, caught Maisie's eye, and gave her a look that communicated an entire paragraph of anxiety without words. She nodded and kept moving. She'd been working the chafing station for about 12 minutes when she realized she'd set it up 6 inches too close to the edge of the service cart, and that the cart itself was parked on a section of marble flooring that had a barely perceptible slant toward the main room. She noticed this at the same moment the cart began to move. It was a slow movement, almost gentle. The kind of movement that gives you just enough time to understand exactly what's about to happen before it happens. Maisie grabbed for the cart. Her left foot slipped on the polished floor. The tray of pasta, fresh linguine with a tomato cream sauce she'd been hired to present as a sample dish for the restaurant's menu preview, went airborne in a graceful, terrible arc. It did not land gracefully. The crash was spectacular enough that conversation stopped across the entire room. The tray hit the marble floor with a sound like a cymbal strike, and the sauce, deep red, rich, fragrant, spread across approximately 4 square feet of white marble in a pattern that would have been almost beautiful if it hadn't been a catastrophe. Maisie stood in the wreckage of it. For one long second, nobody moved. Then approximately 38 people looked at her. Her face went hot from the jaw up. She crouched immediately, pulling the hand towel from her apron, and began trying to address the mess with the focused energy of someone attempting to contain a flood with a single sandbag. The sauce was still warm. It had velocity. It was losing the battle against physics. "I'm so sorry," she said, to the floor, to the room, to the general situation. "I've got it. I'm sorry." She was aware, in the peripheral way you become aware of things during a crisis, that Gerald had materialized somewhere to her left and was communicating distress through body language alone. She was also aware that the woman with the clipboard was approaching. She was also aware that the room had not entirely resumed its previous ambient noise level, which meant people were still watching. She kept cleaning. And then she heard footsteps. Not Gerald's rapid shuffle. Not the clipboard woman's efficient stride. These were different, measured, deliberate, carrying the particular quality of authority that doesn't need to announce itself. They stopped approximately 2 feet from where she was crouching. She looked up. Roman Castelli was taller than the photograph suggested, which was something Maisie registered in the first half-second and then set aside because there were more immediately relevant things to process. He was standing with his hands in the pockets of a suit jacket that cost more than her car, looking down at the mess on the floor with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize. Not irritation exactly. Not the polished blankness of someone performing patience. Something quieter. His eyes were darker than the photographs too. He wasn't looking at the sauce on the floor. He was looking at the thermos she'd knocked over in the confusion. Her thermos, her own food, the lunch she'd made herself at 5 a.m., which had rolled against the base of the nearest white table and come partially unscrewed, releasing into the air of this $1,000,000 hospitality suite the smell of her homemade pasta. Not the catering pasta she'd spilled. Her pasta. The one she'd made from her grandmother's recipe, or the recipe she called her grandmother's recipe, because that was easier than explaining the truth of where she'd learned it. Tomatoes from a can, San Marzano, because some things you don't compromise on even when money is tight. Garlic, olive oil, a pinch of sugar. And the thing she'd never been able to fully explain, a scraping of dark chocolate, 70% cacao, barely half a square of it, added at the end when you thought you were finished, followed by a strip of citrus peel, blood orange if you could find it, navel if you couldn't, held directly over the flame for 3 seconds until it charred, and then dropped into the sauce for 30 seconds before being removed. Mrs. Elena had taught her that part. "The secret is almost nothing," the old woman had said in her careful, accented English, sitting in the kitchen of the apartment 3 floors above Maisie's childhood home in Little Italy. "Almost nothing," added at the right moment, and then removed before anyone can taste it directly. Only the ghost of it remains. That is what makes someone say, "This is different. This is something." But they cannot say why. Maisie had been 9 years old. She'd been making the sauce the same way for 26 years. Roman Castelli crouched down. Not the way someone crouches when they're helping with a mess. The way someone crouches when they need to be closer to something they don't yet understand. He was looking at her thermos. The smell from it was direct and warm and completely out of place in a room that smelled of money and floral arrangements and anxious ambition. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, "That's yours." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Maisie said. "I'm sorry. I know it's not. I wasn't going to eat it in here. I just needed somewhere to. I'll put it away, and I'll finish cleaning the floor, and I apologize again for the. What's in it?" She stopped. He was looking at her now instead of the thermos. His expression had changed in a way she couldn't precisely name. Not softened, that wasn't the right word. Sharpened, maybe. The way a person's face changes when they've heard something unexpected in a piece of music they thought they already knew. "Pasta," she said. Specifically. She blinked. Around them, the room had reached the kind of quiet that exists in the space between an ordinary moment and an extraordinary one, though nobody in the room could have said yet which way it was going to go. "Tomato, garlic, olive oil. It's nothing special, I just. What else?" His voice was flat, not rude. Precise. The voice of someone who asks questions because they want answers, not because they're performing curiosity. Maisie sat back on her heels. She was still holding the sauce-stained hand towel. She was aware that this was a deeply strange conversation to be having on the floor of a $40 million hospitality suite in front of a room full of supermodels and fashion industry people, and that Gerald was going to have a great deal to say to her about this later, and that none of that felt particularly relevant right now. "Chocolate," she said, "and charred citrus." Something happened to Roman Castelli's face. It was small. A tension she hadn't noticed, somewhere behind his eyes, that released so briefly she might have imagined it. His jaw moved once, like he'd started to say something and decided against it. He looked at the thermos again. Then he stood up. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at nothing in particular. The middle distance, the floor, some internal geography that had nothing to do with the room they were standing in. "Mr. Castelli," the clipboard woman said, appearing at his elbow with the carefully calibrated tension of someone who manages a schedule and has just watched it begin to come apart. "The presentation was scheduled to begin in. Cancel it." The word landed in the room like a stone in still water. The woman stared at him. "I'm sorry?" "The presentation." He turned to look at her. "Cancel it." "Sir, we have 10 contracted talent. A full press package. The photographer has been set up since. I heard myself the first time, Diane. Not cruel. Final. Cancel the presentation. Compensate everyone for their time. Have accounting send the release paperwork to their agencies tonight." He looked back down at Maisie, who was still sitting on the floor next to a spreading puddle of tomato cream sauce, holding a dirty hand towel, and trying to determine whether she was experiencing a professional crisis or a hallucination. "What's your name?" "Maisie. Maisie Rowan. Ms. Rowan." He reached down, not to help her up. That wasn't quite the gesture, but to pick up her thermos from where it had rolled. He screwed the lid back on with care, handed it to her. "Can you cook anything other than pasta?" She stared at him. "Yes," she said. "I can cook most things." "Did you make this yourself today?" "At 5 in the morning." Something almost moved across his face. "Why 5 in the morning?" "Because the shift started at 6 and I didn't want to be late." He looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he straightened completely, turned to Diane with the clipboard and said, "Get her information, set up a meeting in my office for Monday morning, 9 a.m. "She's catering staff, Mr. Castelli. She works for Monday, 9 a.m. He was already walking away. "And clean up that floor before someone falls." The 10 supermodels left in an atmosphere of bewildered, barely contained fury. Maisie cleaned the floor. Gerald did not speak to her for the rest of the shift, which was in its own way a more eloquent communication than anything he might have said. She packed up the chafing equipment. She recovered her thermos. She took the service stairs back down 42 flights because the elevator was still broken. On the street outside Castelli Tower in the October cold of lower Manhattan, she stood for a moment on the sidewalk with her rolling cart and her thermos and her grease-stained apron, and she looked up at the building's glass face reflecting the night sky. She had no idea what had just happened. She had a strong suspicion that her life was about to change in ways she could not yet measure, and that she did not have adequate information to know whether this was a good thing. She went home and made tea and did not sleep. Monday came fast. Maisie arrived at Castelli Tower at 8:45 because she did not know how to be late to things, even things that frightened her. She was wearing the best clothes she owned, dark trousers, a fitted blouse the color of old wine, boots that she'd resoled twice but kept polished because her mother had told her you could tell a great deal about a person from the state of their shoes. Her hair, dark and thick and only loosely cooperating, was pulled back with a clip she'd bought at a drugstore for $2.50. She told the lobby reception her name and the nature of her appointment and watched the man behind the desk process this information with the carefully neutral expression of someone who has been trained not to visibly register surprise. 44th floor, he said. Someone will meet you at the elevator. The elevator worked this time. A woman met her on 44. Not Diane, someone else. A young assistant named Clara, who smiled with genuine warmth and led her down a corridor paneled in dark wood and glass toward a corner office that occupied what felt like an unreasonable amount of square footage. Through the office windows, New York spread out in every direction. The city in morning looked different from up here, smaller and larger simultaneously, like something you could hold in your hand and also something that could bury you. Roman Castelli was already behind his desk when Clara showed her in. He was on the phone, and he finished the call in 2 sentences without looking up, and then he set the phone down and looked at her with the same focused attention he'd aimed at her thermos on Friday night, which was a disconcerting kind of attention to be on the receiving end of. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "Tell me about the recipe." No preamble, no how are you, no thank you for coming. Just tell me about the recipe. Which was somehow less rude than it should have been, because it was so precisely what he meant that there was nothing dishonest about it. Maisie folded her hands in her lap. "It's not my recipe," she said. "I mean, I've been making it for 26 years, so it's mine in the way that things become yours over time, but I learned it from a woman who lived in my building when I was a child, in Little Italy. She was old when I knew her. 80, maybe older. She was Italian, spoke with an accent, kept to herself mostly. She used to watch me after school when my mother was working late." Roman had not moved. He was watching her with the stillness of someone who already knows what they're about to be told and is waiting, with great control, for the moment of confirmation. "Mrs. Elena," Maisie said. "That's what she asked me to call her. I don't know if that was her real name. She never talked about her past. She talked about food." She paused. "She was the best cook I've ever known. Not technique, not in the formal sense, just understanding. She understood what food was for. She said it was the only honest thing. You can't fake a good meal." Roman's jaw tightened. It was a small movement. She almost missed it. "She disappeared," Maisie continued. "I was around 12 when it happened. One day she was there, the next she wasn't. No explanation. The apartment was cleared out. The landlord said she'd moved, but there was something off about the way he said it, and I was 12, so I didn't push. I've thought about her my whole life." She looked at him. "The chocolate and the citrus. She said that was her mother's secret, her family's recipe. That she'd learned it as a girl in a small town outside Naples. The office was very quiet." "Her mother's name," Roman said. His voice was controlled in the way that things under enormous pressure are controlled. Not calm, exactly, but managed. "Did she ever mention it?" Maisie frowned. "Once. She was telling me about a summer when she was young, before she came to America. She mentioned her mother in the past tense, like she'd been gone a long time. She said—" Maisie stopped. She had a good memory for details that mattered to her, and this one had lodged somewhere deep when she was 12 and never entirely left. She said, "My mother's name was Belladonna, for the flower. She was the most beautiful woman I ever saw and the most dangerous person I ever knew." And then she laughed, and she changed the subject. "Je parle pas mic all du passé." Roman Castelli looked at her for a long time. Then he stood up, turned to the window, and looked at New York. His hands were at his sides, open, like someone who has just set down something extremely heavy. "The restaurant," he said very quietly, is named after her. It wasn't directed at Maisie. It was the kind of statement that comes out of a person sideways when something finally completes a circuit that has been broken for a long time. Maisie understood, in a moment of comprehension that arrived whole and without warning, that she was looking at a man who had just been given something back, something he'd stopped expecting to recover, and that this was not a comfortable thing to witness because it was too private and too large for this office, for this meeting, for the professional distance they were supposed to be maintaining. She said nothing. After a moment, Roman turned back. His face had resettled into something more controlled, but the control was effortful now, in a way it hadn't been before, and she could see the effort, and that somehow made her trust him marginally more than she had 30 seconds ago. I want you to be the executive chef of Casa Belladonna, he said. Not a trial run, not a consulting arrangement. Chef, creative control over the menu. The kitchen is yours. We open in 14 weeks. Maisie stared at him. I've never run a professional kitchen, she said. I know. I'm a catering waitress. I know what you are. The 10 women from Friday night, that entire campaign, you were building something specific, a brand. I'm not, she gestured at herself in a way that was more honest than flattering. I'm not what any of that was going to be. No, Roman agreed. You're not. He picked up a folder from his desk and slid it across to her. That's the original concept for the brand campaign. Look at it. She opened the folder. Glossy presentation boards, art direction, proposed advertising copy. Carefully curated imagery of the kind of aspirational beauty that is designed to make people feel both desire and inadequacy in equal measure. She looked at it for a moment. It's elegant, she said carefully. It's dishonest, Roman said. My mother fed people because she loved them. She fed strangers. She fed us, my sister and me, on nights when there was barely money for the ingredients. She made food that tasted like something meant specifically for you, not for everyone. For you. He looked at the campaign materials. That, a brief pause, has nothing to do with what she built. Maisie closed the folder. You want me to be the face, she said slowly, working through it. Not just the chef. Both. The press is going to eat me alive. Almost certainly. That doesn't bother you? He looked at her steadily. Does it bother you? She thought about it honestly. She was 35 years old. She had worked service jobs since she was 16. She had learned to cook in an elderly woman's small kitchen on Mulberry Street and had spent 23 years cooking for other people's events while feeding herself simply and without ceremony. She was not beautiful by the standards of the room she'd walked into on Friday night, and she had known this about herself since childhood and had made a generally comfortable peace with it, though the peace was of the kind that requires occasional renegotiation. Did the prospect of being publicly ridiculed bother her? Yes, she said. Of course it does. Good, Roman said. If it didn't, I'd reconsider. He sat back down. I'm not asking you to pretend it won't be hard. I'm asking you to do it anyway. Maisie was quiet for a moment. I want to see the kitchen, she said. He showed her the kitchen himself. Casa Belladonna occupied the ground floor of the De Luca building 3 blocks north of Castelli Tower, a space that had been, over the course of 18 months and a budget she refused to ask about, transformed from a derelict corner property into something that felt like the inside of a memory. Warm stone, arched ceilings, an open kitchen behind glass, visible from the dining room, so that the work of cooking was not hidden but honored. Maisie walked through it slowly. She touched the counters. She opened refrigerator doors. She checked the burners, the ventilation, the sight lines from the past to the dining room. She was aware of Roman standing near the door, watching her, and she put that awareness aside because the kitchen required her full attention and she didn't have any to spare. Who built the menu concept? She asked, not looking up from the range. A team, consultants. It's not final. Can I see it? He handed her a tablet. She scrolled through the proposed dishes. Classical Italian, executed at the level of fine dining. Beautiful on paper, technically immaculate. She set the tablet down. It's wrong, she said. Tell me how. It's the kind of food that people eat to impress each other. It's not the kind of food that makes someone call their mother after dinner. She picked up the tablet again, looked at the menu. If you want to honor who she was, what you told me about her, then the food has to feel like home. Not anyone's specific home. The idea of home. The place you're always slightly homesick for, even when you're in it. She set the tablet down again. That takes a different kind of cooking. Less technique. More honesty. Roman was looking at her with that quality of attention again. The kind that was not comfortable to receive because it was complete. That's what I want, he said. Can you do it? I don't know, she said. I've never built a restaurant menu before. But you could. Maybe. That's enough, he said. For now, that's enough. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Maisie's life, and her life had not been short on strange passages. She went from catering waitress to executive chef of a restaurant that had not yet opened, but was already generating column inches in food publications and fashion media, the latter primarily in the form of bewildered outrage. The Supermodels had representatives who spoke to the press. The fashion world's consensus, delivered through various channels of varying explicitness, was that Roman Castelli had lost his mind, and that the replacement of 10 internationally recognized faces with an unremarkable plus-size catering waitress from the Bronx was either a calculated provocation or a catastrophic error. Maisie read some of it. She couldn't entirely help herself. She read it the way you touch a bruise, not because it feels good, but because you need to know the dimension of the damage. Then she went back to the kitchen. The kitchen was the only place in this new landscape where the parameters were clear. Food responded to skill and attention in ways that were honest and immediate. You either hit the balance or you didn't, and the dish knew the difference even when you didn't want to admit it. She built the menu from memory, not recipes. The things you build from recipes are technically correct and emotionally inert. She built it from meals she'd actually eaten, actually made, actually needed at specific moments in her life. The pasta she'd learned from Mrs. Elena, the braised pork her mother made on Sunday afternoons in a kitchen barely bigger than a closet, the roasted vegetables that her downstairs neighbor, a Calabrian woman named Agnès, had brought upstairs the week Maisie's cat died, which seemed like a small thing but was the largest act of comfort she could remember receiving from a near stranger. Food is memory. Food is apology. Food is love in the absence of better words for it. Roman came to the kitchen at the end of each day. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected meetings, consultations, the occasional scheduled check-in with someone from his management team. Instead, he came himself at 7 or 8 in the evening when the kitchen staff had gone home, and she was still there. She was always still there, working through the menu or costing the recipes or trying to solve the problem of how to make a dish that was technically simple feel emotionally complete. He didn't help. He wasn't in the kitchen to help. He sat on the stainless steel counter near the door with a glass of water and watched her work. And he asked questions that were sometimes about the food and sometimes about other things. And she answered them because there was something about the kitchen at that hour. The particular quality of the silence, the smell of the day's cooking still in the air, that made it difficult to be anything other than direct. You said Mrs. Elena never talked about her past, he said one evening, a week and a half into it. Did she talk about family? Maisie was tasting the sauce, adjusting. Not directly. She mentioned a daughter once, I think, in passing. She said something like, "She is safe, wherever she is. I made sure of that." And then she moved on, and I was young enough that I didn't register how strange that was until years later. Roman was quiet. She looked over at him. She had a son, he said. His voice was even. His hands were still, the glass of water balanced between his palms. She had a son and a daughter. The daughter was sent away when things became dangerous, when she was 8. The son stayed because he was 16 and thought he could protect her, and was wrong. He looked at the glass. She spent the next 20 years in protection programs, relocating every few years when something shifted. She settled in New York for a period, Little Italy. A pause. She was found 3 years ago, by the people who'd been looking for her since before the son was 20. Sartul. The kitchen held the sound of the ventilation and nothing else for a moment. Roman, Maisie said. He looked up. His face was doing the controlled thing again, but the effort was visible in a way she'd come to recognize over the past week and a half, and she thought, not for the first time, that the control was not the truth of him. The effort was. "I'm sorry," she said. "She would have liked you," he said simply. It was not the kind of statement she knew how to respond to, and she didn't try. She turned back to the sauce. She made a small adjustment. She let the kitchen hold the space between them without rushing to fill it. Later, much later, she would understand that this was the moment. Not one of the dramatic ones. Not the night she'd spilled the pasta, or the morning in his office, or any of the moments that would eventually make it into the stories people told about how this had all begun. This quiet one. In the kitchen at 9 in the evening, with the overhead lights humming and the sauce almost right. This was the moment she stopped being careful. The press coverage reached a new level of hostility the week that the campaign imagery went public. It had been shot over 2 days by a photographer named Marco Singh, who worked primarily in documentary portraiture and had been briefed specifically to make Maisie look like herself. Not elevated, not transformed. Herself. In the kitchen. At the market buying ingredients before dawn. Sitting at the counter of the nearly finished restaurant eating a bowl of something simple and looking out the window at the street. The images were beautiful in the way that real things are beautiful. Quietly, resistantly, without asking to be recognized as beautiful. The fashion industry's response was not charitable. The comment sections were what comment sections are. She didn't read all of them. She read enough to get the shape of it, and the shape of it was, "You don't belong here," which was not a new shape. She'd been receiving some version of that message for most of her adult life, usually more politely phrased. What was new was the magnitude of the delivery system. She was sitting in the restaurant at a corner table with her laptop at 10 on a Thursday night, trying to finalize a dish for the opening menu, and failing because she'd been awake since 4 a.m. and her brain had started producing static, when the front door opened. She hadn't locked it. She kept forgetting to lock it. Roman came in, looked at her, looked at the laptop, looked at the time on his watch. "Go home," he said. "I'm almost done." "You've been almost done since 7. How do you know when I got here?" "Because you always get here before 7. She looked up from the laptop. He was in a suit jacket he'd clearly been wearing since morning, and he looked like someone who had also been awake since before dawn and had navigated a day that was considerably more complicated than hers, and she felt the particular irritation of being told to do something you know you should be doing. "I'll leave when the menu note is finished," she said. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Then I'll wait," he said. "You don't have to. I'm aware." She stared at him. He looked back unremarkably, as though sitting across from her in an unlit restaurant at 10 p.m. on a Thursday was a perfectly ordinary thing to do. She went back to the menu note. It was another 40 minutes before she finished. He sat across from her for all of it, not talking, not looking at his phone, occasionally looking at the unlit dining room with an expression she'd learned to read as the particular form of grief that has been living with a person long enough to become ordinary. The restaurant was his mother's restaurant. The grief was his mother's absence. The two things were inseparable, and he carried them both without complaint, and she found this, the uncomplaining part, more affecting than she expected. She closed the laptop. "Done," she said. He stood. "I'll walk you out." Outside, on the sidewalk, the October air was sharper. She pulled her coat closed. He stood next to her while she called the car service she'd started using because the subway at 11 p.m. had started to feel like a risk she didn't need to take. The car was 4 minutes away. They stood in the kind of silence that has weight to it. Not uncomfortable, just significant in a way that neither of them was prepared to address directly. "The coverage," he said eventually. "I know it's fine," she said. "It's not fine." "No," she agreed. "But it will be, once the restaurant opens and people can actually taste the food. The food is real. The rest of this is..." She gestured at nothing in particular, at the whole situation. "Theater. It'll resolve. And if it doesn't?" She looked at him. "Then I'll make better food." He was quiet for a moment. "You're not scared." "I'm terrified," she said. "All the time. I'm just also doing it anyway." He looked at her with the focused attention she'd stopped trying to deflect, and she looked back, and the car service arrived before either of them said anything else. She got in. Through the window, she watched him stand on the sidewalk until the car rounded the corner. He didn't move. He just watched her leave, with his hands in his pockets and his face doing something she couldn't read from this distance. She thought about it the whole ride home. Those 3 weeks before the opening, something shifted. She wasn't sure exactly when it happened or how to name it accurately. It wasn't a single moment. It was an accumulation. The way sediment builds up, invisible, until suddenly the riverbed is changed and you're wading in different water without having noticed the transition. He stopped being Mr. Castelli. She stopped being Ms. Rowan. The evenings in the kitchen stopped feeling like work check-ins and started feeling like something she actively looked forward to in a way that made her careful with herself, because she understood the parameters here, and she was not stupid. He was Roman Castelli. She knew what that meant, in the specific way that anyone living in New York and paying attention knew what it meant. The legitimate empire was real. The restaurants, the hotels, the hospitality group that employed thousands of people. The other thing was also real. And she did not have proof of it, but she had intuition that had served her reasonably well for 35 years. And her intuition told her that the men who stood near the exits of every building she entered, and the car that sat outside her apartment building on evenings when she worked late, and the way that certain people stepped back when Roman entered a room, none of that was the ordinary friction of being a successful businessman. She knew. She hadn't decided yet what to do with knowing. One evening she was in the kitchen late, alone, the way she often was, working on a dessert that had been giving her trouble. Something simple, she'd decided, because the menu was already honest and the dessert needed to be honest too. Not complicated, not showy. The kind of thing you eat and then sit quietly with for a moment before you say anything. She heard the kitchen door. Roman came in, but he was on the phone, and his voice was different from the voice she knew. Quieter, controlled in a different register. He was speaking in short sentences, and she couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to, because the quality of his attention, the whole-body focus of someone managing something dangerous, was unmistakable to anyone who'd learned to read a room as a survival skill. He ended the call. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, and she could see him make the transition, something he folded away, carefully, before he turned toward her. She met his eyes. He was still for a beat. "Late," he said. "Working," she said. He walked in. He sat on the counter. She handed him a spoon with the dessert on it, because she needed a second opinion, and he was here. He tasted it. His face didn't do the complicated thing it sometimes did. It did something simpler. "What is it?" he said. "Honey and ricotta, walnut, a piece of charred orange peel?" He looked at the spoon. "She used to make something like this," he said, "on Sundays." "I know," Maisie said quietly. "She taught me." He set the spoon down carefully, and then he looked at her, and the control was gone. Not broken, not shattered, but deliberately set aside, the way you put something down when your hands are full and you need them for something more important. She looked back, and that was when the door opened. Not the kitchen door, the front entrance. And the man who came through it, flanked by two others, was not someone who worked for Roman. She understood that immediately from the way Roman's entire body changed, from the way he turned toward the door with the focused stillness of someone who has just encountered a threat and is calculating the dimensions of it. The man in the doorway was smiling. He was perhaps 60, well-dressed, with a face that had the quality of studied pleasantness that disguises something considerably less pleasant underneath. He looked at Roman first, then at Maisie, and then back at Roman, and the smile widened slightly, taking in the space between them, the spoon on the counter, the intimacy of the scene. Cataloging it, she realized, filing it away. "Roman," the man said, "I heard the place was almost ready. I thought I'd stop by." Roman said nothing. He was between the man and Maisie without appearing to have moved. "Maisie Rowan," the man said, looking around Roman at her. "I've read about you. Everyone has." His voice was smooth and warm and completely without warmth. "What a story." Maisie did not answer. The man, she didn't know his name yet, but she would, looked at the kitchen, at the food on the counter, at the spoon that Roman had set down so carefully. The smile remained. It never reached anything. "Don't let me interrupt," he said. "I just wanted to see it. I've been so curious." Another look between them. Slow, deliberate, measuring. About everything. He left the way he'd come. The door closed. The kitchen was silent. Roman turned around. His face was blank now, all the way blank, and she understood that the blankness was not emptiness, but the opposite. Something so densely packed that it required a face like a closed door to contain it. "Who was that?" Maisie asked. Roman picked up his phone. He looked at it for a moment. He put it back in his pocket. "His name is Sebastian Morello," he said. He said it the way people say the names of things that have been dangerous for a long time. Flatly, without drama, the way you name the weather condition that's going to complicate the drive. And then he looked at her and she saw it. The thing she hadn't seen before, or hadn't let herself see. Not calculation. Fear. The specific kind that isn't about the person who's afraid. The kind that arrives when you realize something you care about has been seen by someone who understands how to use what they see. "Maisie," he said. She waited. "I need you to listen to me very carefully." The kitchen felt different now. The warmth of the evening, the dessert on the counter, the almost moment that had existed between them 60 seconds ago, all of it had been replaced by something harder and colder, and she looked at the man across from her and saw, for the first time fully, both of who he was simultaneously. The man who had sat on the counter and tasted her food and talked about his mother, and the man who had turned toward a threat with the stillness of someone who had navigated threats for 20 years and understood their grammar. She thought about the car outside her apartment building. She thought about the men near the exits. She thought about Mrs. Elena, who had lived under a false name in a walk-up in Little Italy and taught a lonely child to cook and then disappeared one day without warning or explanation, and about the careful way Roman had said she was found 3 years ago by the people who'd been looking for her. She thought about Sebastian Morello's smile. "Tell me," she said. Roman didn't sit down. That was the first thing she noticed. He was a man who occupied space with a particular kind of economy. He didn't pace, didn't fidget, didn't fill silence with motion. But right now he was standing in the middle of the kitchen and not sitting down. And the difference between that and his usual stillness was the difference between a river and a current. Sebastian Morello runs the Eastern Distribution Network for 3 syndicates operating out of Brighton Beach, Red Hook, and parts of Newark, he said. His voice was the flat, factual voice of someone reading a report they've memorized. He's been trying to acquire Castelli port access for 11 years. He sent lawyers, he sent intermediaries, he sent other kinds of messages. A pause that contained a great deal. "I've declined every approach. And tonight he came to look at a restaurant," Maisie said. "He came to look at you." The ventilation hummed. The honey and ricotta sat on the counter between them, a small and suddenly absurd reminder of what they'd been doing 10 minutes ago. "Why me?" she said. It wasn't quite a question. Roman looked at her steadily. "Because I don't have vulnerabilities he can use. I don't have a wife. My sister has been overseas and off-grid for 9 years by choice. I don't have—" He stopped. Started again. "Men like Sebastian don't negotiate with strength. They find the thing you protect and they put their hands on it. And I'm the thing. You've become visible. The campaign, the press. Everyone knows you're here. Everyone knows I—" He stopped again, shorter this time, like he'd run into a wall he hadn't fully seen. "You're associated with me now in a way that's public and documented, and that I allowed to happen because I didn't think—" His jaw moved. "I wasn't thinking about the exposure. I was thinking about the restaurant." "You were thinking about your mother," Maisie said. He didn't answer. She'd learned in the weeks since this had all started that there was a specific quality to Roman's silences. Some of them were tactical. He used silence the way other people used language, to occupy space and apply pressure. But some of them were the other kind, the kind that meant the sentence existed, but he decided not to say it out loud, and this was the other kind. "What does he want?" she said. "Port access. Routing contracts. About $2.4 billion in annual revenue from the legitimate shipping operations." He said it like a number, flat and factual. "And he wants me to know that he's found a way to ask for it, that I can't simply refuse." Maisie was quiet for a moment. The kitchen felt smaller than it had an hour ago. "I'm not going to hide," she said. "I know. I'm also not going to pretend I'm not scared, because I am. But I'm not going to stop working, and I'm not going to disappear from the campaign or the restaurant because some man walked through a door and smiled at me in a way I didn't like." "Maisie, I'm not finished." She kept her voice even. I understand what you're telling me. I understand the shape of it. But you hired me to do a job, and the job is real, and the restaurant opens in 3 weeks, and the food needs to be right. So tell me what I need to know to be careful, and I'll be careful, and we'll deal with the rest of it. Roman looked at her for a long moment. There'll be a security detail, he said, starting tonight. You won't see most of them, but they'll be there. Okay. You call me directly if anything feels wrong. Not the building security, not the staff, not the police. Me. She nodded. And Maisie. He waited until she looked at him directly. I need you to understand that this situation exists because of me, because of choices I made long before I knew you existed. I need you to understand that clearly so you can make your own decision about whether you want to. Roman. She picked up the spoon, rinsed it, set it in the dish rack. Go home. It's late. He stood there for a beat. You're not going to have the conversation I just tried to start, he said. Not tonight, she said. Tonight I'm going to finish this dessert and then I'm going to go home and sleep. Because I have a menu review at 7 a.m. and I haven't slept more than 5 hours in a week. She looked over her shoulder at him. Go home. He went. She stood at the counter for a while after the front door closed, not working, just standing, her hands flat on the steel surface, and her heartbeat doing something uneven that she breathed through slowly until it resolved. Then she finished the dessert. She told herself she wasn't looking for the security detail, and that was mostly true. She told herself she wasn't looking for black sedans outside her building or unfamiliar faces in the coffee shop below, and that was less true. She found them anyway, not because they were obvious, but because she'd worked service jobs for 19 years and you learn, doing that work, to read a room by its edges, to notice who doesn't belong where they're standing. The man who ordered a coffee at the counter of the shop below her apartment every morning and drank it standing up, facing the door. The woman who sat in the corner of the restaurant's dining room during prep hours with a tablet and headphones, but whose eyes moved differently than someone watching a screen. The car, yes. Dark gray, not black. Different plates every few days, always within a half block. She didn't mention them to Roman. She worked. The kitchen in the final weeks before opening is its own kind of war. Not the romantic version, but the operational one. Every dish a negotiation between what you intended and what you can actually execute at scale, under pressure, with a kitchen staff that is learning your rhythms and you theirs. She'd hired 8 people, with Roman's approval and a hiring process that had been more rigorous than anything she'd done before, because the kitchen was going to be visible, and she wasn't going to staff it with people who couldn't hold up under the pressure of being watched. Her sous chef was a 30-year-old named Priya, who'd trained in Mumbai and London, and had the particular combination of precision and intuition that Maisie valued more than any resume credential. She had a quiet authority in the kitchen that complemented Maisie's own, and she did not appear intimidated by anything, including the week she discovered the full scope of Maisie's public situation and responded with a single raised eyebrow and the observation that the food was excellent and everything else was secondary. Maisie liked her immediately and permanently. The days compressed into sequences of tasks. Menu finalization, sourcing meetings, staff training. The particular diplomacy of getting 8 people to work as a unit in a high-pressure kitchen without ego fractures. She barely left the restaurant. She didn't think much about Sebastian Morello's smile, because there was too much to think about that required her actual attention, and she had learned long ago that fear you can't act on is just fuel you're burning for nothing. She thought about Roman, more than she intended to, more than was professionally sensible, not in a way she'd fully articulated to herself yet. It was more like a frequency she kept brushing against, a sound just below hearing that made her aware of it by its effect rather than its presence. He came every evening, without fail and without explanation. He sat on the counter or at the corner table and he talked, or didn't talk, depending on what the evening required, and she cooked or talked, depending on the same. It had become a rhythm she'd stopped questioning because questioning it would require naming it, and she wasn't ready to name it. 3 days before opening, he came in at 6 instead of 8. She heard the door and looked up from the fish delivery she was checking and saw his face. His face was doing the closed thing, the control under pressure thing, but it was more pronounced than usual, and she felt the shift in the room the way you feel a change in atmospheric pressure. Not visibly, but in your body, in the small adjustments you make without deciding to. What happened? She said. Nothing that affects the opening. That's not what I asked. He was quiet for a moment. He came into the kitchen and stood near the door, not close, and she noticed he was carrying himself differently. Weight shifted slightly, shoulders back, the body language of someone who has been in a tense situation recently and hasn't fully stood down from it. There was a meeting, he said. This morning. Morello sent a representative. To your office? Yes. She set down the fish she'd been examining. And? The representative delivered a formalized version of the same request. Port access, routing contracts, a seat at the table for certain operations that I will not have a seat at my table. His voice was even. Along with a suggestion that my current focus, the restaurant, the campaign, certain personal investments of my time and attention, had left certain operational areas less supervised than might be wise. He's telling you that you've gone soft. He's telling me that he's been watching and that he's confident about what he sees. Maisie was quiet for a moment, looking at him. What did you say to the representative? I said no. A pause. And I said it in terms that made my position clear, which means the next communication will not come through a representative. The kitchen absorbed this. The refrigerator cycled. Priya was in the walk-in cooler and would be out in approximately 4 minutes. Roman, Maisie said, how dangerous is this? He looked at her. The control held, but she could see what it was holding. Dangerous, he said. Just that. She nodded once. She went back to the fish. He stood there for a moment, watching her, and she could feel the quality of his watching. Something in it that was not professional, and had not been professional for a while. And she understood it because she was in the same territory herself, had been for longer than she'd admitted. And she was choosing right now, in this moment, not to step back from it. I'm not leaving, she said, not looking up. In case that's what you came to tell me to do. I know, he said, and I'm not scared of you. I know that too. His voice had shifted, not softer, but different. I'm scared for you. There's a distinction. She looked up at him. Then let's open the best restaurant in New York, she said, and give him as little to work with as possible. Priya came out of the walk-in. She looked at Roman, looked at Maisie, registered the specific atmospheric quality of the room with the accuracy of someone who reads rooms for a living, and said nothing whatsoever, which was one of the many reasons Maisie trusted her. We're running behind on the sauce reduction, Priya said, setting down her clipboard with perfect composure. Chef, I need you. Maisie wiped her hands and went. Casa Belladonna opened on a Friday night in November. The reservation list had been full for 6 weeks. The press coverage going into opening night was the kind that exists in 2 contradictory registers simultaneously. Genuine anticipation from the food world, which had started paying close attention to what Maisie was actually building, and the ongoing entertainment industry circus that had decided her presence in this role was a story worth monetizing regardless of the actual food. She was in the kitchen by 4 a.m. Not because she needed to be, because there was no version of this day on which she was not in the kitchen by 4 a.m. Priya arrived at 4:45 without comment, looked at what Maisie had already done, and said, You've been here since 3, haven't you? And Maisie said 4. And Priya said, Respectfully, chef, you need to eat something, and put a bowl of simple broth in front of her, and that was the most anyone said about it. The kitchen team came in at 6. By 7, the prep line was running with the particular concentrated energy of people who understood the stakes and were choosing to rise to meet them. She walked the line twice. She tasted everything. She sent back 2 sauces and a stock that weren't right yet, without apology, because the food was not going to be wrong tonight. At 2 in the afternoon, Roman appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was in a suit, the opening night version. She'd been peripherally aware that there was going to be a certain degree of press and public-facing obligation tonight, the kind that came with being Roman Castelli and opening a restaurant that had become a cultural moment, apparently. And he looked like someone who'd been managing things since before dawn, which he probably had. He looked at the kitchen, at the line running clean and precise, at Maisie at the pass, calling checks, moving with the focused authority of someone in the place they are most themselves. At the food, several dozen completed dishes already waiting in the lowboy, mise en place, set out with the kind of accuracy that comes from people who have rehearsed enough to have it in their muscle memory. She felt him looking and didn't stop what she was doing. 2 hours, she told him, without turning. Come back in 2 hours and you can taste the tasting menu in order. I'll be here, he said. And bring Diane, she added. I need to know if the front of house timing is matching what we planned. He was quiet for a moment, then, You know you're extraordinary. She kept her eyes on the pass. I know the branzino is perfect, and the pasta is better than perfect, and the dessert is going to make someone cry. Come back in 2 hours. She heard him leave. Priya, from the sauce station, said absolutely nothing, which communicated everything. The service was not perfect. No opening night is perfect, and anyone who tells you theirs was is lying or misremembering. Table 7 got their second course before their first was cleared. A sauce broke on one of the fish dishes in the early seating and had to be remade in 30 seconds, which they did, but it cost them. One server called in sick 90 minutes before service, and they redistributed the floor with the controlled, tension-forward calm of people doing triage. But the food was right. The food was completely right. She knew it when the first orders came back. Clean plates, which meant not that people had finished out of obligation, but that there had been nothing left worth leaving. She knew it when a ticket came back through the pass with a note from the front of the house. Table 4, asking for the name of the pasta chef. She knew it when one of the servers came to the pass at 9:30 with shining eyes and said, Chef, table 12. The woman at table 12 is crying, and Maisie said, Is she unhappy? And the server said no. She said the pasta. She said it tasted like her grandmother's house. Maisie stood at the pass. She breathed in once, all the way. She breathed out. Keep moving, she said. We've got 3 more covers on 12. But she held it. The way you hold something real, briefly, completely, and then you set it down and go back to work. Because the work is how you honor it. Roman came to the kitchen at 11, after the last seating. The kitchen was in cleanup, the controlled aftermath of a successful service, the particular exhausted satisfaction of a team that went through something hard and came out the other side of it with their standards intact. Priya was debriefing the line. 2 of the cooks were washing down the stations with the slow, methodical energy of people whose adrenaline has finally metabolized. He stopped at the pass. He looked at Maisie. She was leaning against the counter with her arms crossed, and her chef's coat stained from the service, and her hair coming out of its clip in pieces. And she was tired in the specific way that is so total it crosses into something almost like peace. Well, she said. The dining room, he said, did not stop talking all night. Was that good? The food critic from the Times spent 40 minutes on the pasta course. She ordered it twice. He paused. The city editor from the Post came in on a reservation he'd held for 3 weeks. He brought his mother. Maisie said nothing. There was nothing to say to that. It worked, Roman said quietly. Maisie. It worked. She looked at him across the kitchen, across the stainless steel and the smells of the night's cooking and the sound of the cleanup crew. And she felt something that didn't have a clean name, but was the accumulation of every decision she'd made since the night she'd spilled pasta on his floor. Every early morning and bruising news cycle and moment of doubt that she'd cooked her way through. Of course it worked, she said. The food was right. He crossed the kitchen. He wasn't moving quickly. He never moved quickly. It wasn't how he was built, but there was something direct about it, something that had made its decision. He stopped in front of her, close. The kitchen noise around them continued its ordinary business, and neither of them was paying any attention to it. Maisie, he said. I know, she said. She did. She'd known for a while, probably since the night with the dessert and the spoon, probably since the evening in his office when he'd turned to the window and set something down. She knew, and he knew she knew, and the kitchen was warm and smelled like the night's best work, and she was 35 years old and tired of being careful about everything. She reached up and put her hand briefly against his face, the way you touch something you want to confirm is real. He was very still. I know, she said again, quieter. He covered her hand with his own. The moment lasted. Outside, somewhere in the vicinity of the dining room, she could hear the last guests still at their tables, voices low with the particular ease of people who have eaten well and don't want the evening to end. The sound of New York through the walls. The ordinary world carrying on. His phone went off. Not the notification buzz of an email or a message. The specific pattern of a call he'd set as a priority ring, different from everything else. And she felt it before she consciously registered it because she'd learned to read the frequency of his phone the way she'd learned to read the kitchen's ambient sounds, as signal. He stepped back, looked at the screen. His face changed. She watched it change and felt the evening shift around them, the warmth of it contracting, the particular quality of the last 5 minutes already becoming something that had happened rather than something that was happening. He answered. He listened. He said 3 words. When? And then, how many? And then nothing. Just listening. And his face was the closed door, and she watched his right hand form a fist at his side without his appearing to notice. He ended the call. He looked at her, and there was something in the look that she recognized as the thing that comes right before a person tells you something you won't be able to unknow. There was an incident, he said, at the waterfront. 2 of my men. She waited. Morello, he said. It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't random, and it wasn't a message. He stopped. His jaw was tight. It was a declaration. The kitchen was suddenly very loud in the way that silence gets loud when it's filled with things that aren't being said. Roman, I need you to listen to me, he said, and his voice was different now. Not the evening voice, not the kitchen voice. The other one. The flat, factual, no-margin voice. I need you to go home tonight. You take the car that's waiting outside. You go directly home. You do not leave your apartment until I contact you. Not for the market, not for the restaurant, not for any reason. The restaurant opens again tomorrow night. I know. His eyes were steady and completely without warmth now, not because the warmth wasn't there, but because it had been overlaid by something that had to take priority. I will resolve this, but I need you to trust me for the next... He stopped, looked at her. Maisie, please. She had not heard him say please before. She looked at this man, both of him simultaneously, the way she'd trained herself to, and she understood that the situation had moved into territory where her judgment about what she could and couldn't handle was no longer the limiting factor. How long? She said. I don't know. You'll call me? Yes. Every day? Yes. She untied her apron. She set it on the counter with the careful deliberateness of someone who is controlling what they can control. She picked up her bag from the hook near the door. She stopped in front of him. Be careful, she said. Something moved across his face. It was brief and complicated, and she thought, she was almost sure, it was the closest thing to fear she had ever seen on him, and it was not for himself. Go, he said. She went. The car was outside, as he'd said. She got in. The driver said nothing, and she was grateful for it. The city moved past the windows in its ordinary November night, cabs and lights, and the permanent ambient roar of 8 million people going about the business of their lives. Her phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. No greeting, no context, nothing but an image. She opened it. It was a photograph, taken from outside, through a window, through the kitchen's glass passed through into the dining room. Tonight, during service. The angle was low and specific, the kind of angle that required someone to position themselves deliberately. The photograph was of her. She was at the pass, calling a check, profile to the camera. She hadn't seen it taken. She hadn't known she was being watched. But someone had been standing outside the restaurant all evening, patient and unhurried, and they had taken her photograph through the glass, and they had sent it to a number she didn't have, and they had done this on the night of the opening, on the night when everything had finally felt, for the first time in weeks, like it might just work. The car moved through the city. She looked at the photograph. Her hands were steady. Her heartbeat was not. She called Roman. He picked up on the first ring. I just got a text, she said, from an unknown number. A silence. Then, what is it? A photograph of me in the kitchen tonight from outside. Another silence, longer, with a different quality. Roman. Don't delete it, he said. His voice was completely flat. Don't respond. Get inside your building and go directly to your apartment. I'm sending someone now. Roman, what does this... It means he's telling me the timeline has moved, Roman said. It means whatever I thought I had to resolve this quietly. He stopped. She could hear something in the background, voices, movement. It means we're past that. She looked at the photograph on her phone, herself, unaware, through glass, patient, unhurried. How past it, she said. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was the voice of a man who has made a decision and is now on the other side of it, and there is no version of the next thing that is easy or safe or reversible. Get inside, he said. Lock the door. I will call you in 1 hour. He ended the call. The car pulled up to her building. The driver was out before she registered it, opening her door, scanning the street in both directions with the practiced efficiency of someone whose job it was to do exactly that. She got out. She looked up at the building's facade, the ordinary brick of it, the lit windows of her neighbors living their ordinary lives. She went inside. She locked the door. She sat on her couch in her apartment in the Bronx with the photograph still open on her phone. And she waited. And outside the November city went about its business. And somewhere in it a man she'd decided to trust was moving through the dark, with a decision made and a war that had already, the hour passed. Then another. Maisie sat on her couch with her coat still on and her phone in both hands and the photograph still open on the screen. And she watched the minutes move and did not sleep and did not make tea and did not do any of the things you do when you are trying to convince yourself that a situation is manageable. At 1:47 a.m., Roman called. "You're inside," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. The man in the lobby is mine. His name is Carver. If you need to leave for any reason before I contact you, you go with him and no one else." "Okay. How are you?" "I'm fine." A pause. "I'm not fine, but I'm inside and the door is locked, and I'm not going to fall apart, so functionally, I'm fine." A brief silence on his end that had a particular quality, the quality of someone who wants to say something and is deciding against it. "I'll call you in the morning," he said. "Roman, tell me what's happening." "I'm handling it. That's not Maisie." His voice dropped a register, not softer, more direct. "I need you to trust me with this part. The way I trust you with the kitchen. There are things happening right now that require my full attention, and I cannot give them my full attention if I'm managing your fear at the same time. Can you do that?" It wasn't quite a question. She looked at the photograph on her phone, herself, through glass, unaware. "Call me before 8, she said. "I don't care what's happened. You call me before 8, or I'm coming to find you myself." Another silence. "Before 8, he said. He called at 7:53. 3 days passed in a suspension that had the quality of something held just before breaking. She stayed in the apartment the first day as he'd asked. The second day she went back to the restaurant because the restaurant opened again that night, and she was not going to let her kitchen run without her 2 days after opening, security situation or not, and she informed Roman of this decision via text rather than phone call because she understood that a text was harder to argue with in real time. He didn't argue. He sent 2 additional people. She felt them in the room the way she felt the kitchen's ambient temperature, as information, as context, as something that was simply part of the current environment. The service was good, not as electric as opening night, because nothing is as electric as opening night, but the food held and the house was full and the Times review went live on the second morning, and it was... She read it 3 times because she couldn't believe it on the first read. 4 stars, with a paragraph in the middle that described the pasta as an act of memory made edible, the kind of cooking that reminds you why the word comfort exists. She sent it to Roman without comment. He responded, "She would have framed this." She held her phone for a moment. She responded, "We can frame it at the restaurant." He responded, "Yes." On the 3rd day, her father called. About. This required context that she hadn't shared with Roman because it hadn't seemed relevant to anything until now. Her father, Dennis Rowan, was 68 years old and lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Hoboken that Maisie paid a portion of the rent on because he'd had a minor cardiac event 14 months ago that had reduced his capacity to work and increased his medical expenses, and because he was her father and she was the person who handled things. They spoke on Sundays. He did not usually call on Wednesdays. He called on a Wednesday at 2 in the afternoon while she was in the restaurant kitchen running the prep. "Maisie," his voice was strange, thin in a way it didn't usually sound. She stepped away from the line. Dad, what's wrong? I'm... Something's wrong with my chest. It started this morning. I didn't want to bother you. I know you've got the... Have you called 911? I didn't want to make a fuss. Dad, she was already pulling her coat off the hook. Call 911, right now. I'll meet you at the hospital. The thing is, he said, and his voice did something uneven. There are 2 men outside my building. I don't know them. They've been there since this morning, and one of them knocked and said there was something wrong with the water line, and I should come with him, and I didn't. I didn't go, but now my chest... Maisie stopped moving. Every sensory input in the kitchen around her receded. Dad, she said. Her voice was very quiet and very controlled. Lock your door. Do not open it for anyone. I'm calling you back in 60 seconds. She hung up. She called Roman. He picked up on the second ring. She said, There are men outside my father's building in Hoboken. They told him there was a problem with the water line and he should go with them. He didn't go. He's alone, and he's saying his chest hurts, and I need to know if this is what I think it is. A silence of approximately 4 seconds. Which building? Roman said. She gave him the address. Don't go there yourself, he said immediately. He's my father. Maisie, listen to me. If you go there yourself right now, you are doing exactly what they want you to do. You're giving them the thing they're trying to get. My people are closer to Hoboken than you are. They'll be there in 8 minutes. Your father stays inside and I will call you back. His chest, if it's cardiac, my people will get him to a hospital. If it's not, he stopped. Stay where you are. 8 minutes. She stood in the kitchen with her coat in her hands. Priya appeared at her elbow, reading the room the way she always did. Chef? Keep the line running, Maisie said. I need 5 minutes. She went to the back corner of the kitchen, near the dry storage, and she stood there and looked at her phone and breathed in the specific, measured way she'd learned to breathe through things she couldn't control, and she waited. Roman called back in 11 minutes. My men are with him, he said. He's stable. The chest pain appears to be anxiety. His BP is elevated, but they don't think it's cardiac. They're taking him to get checked regardless. The men outside, gone. They left when my people arrived. A pause. Maisie, this was a test. I know. He wanted to see if he could move you, if a threat to your father would break your pattern and put you somewhere exposed. And if I'd gone myself? You would have been in a car on the way to Hoboken alone, away from the security here, away from anyone who could... He stopped. It was well designed. She thought about that, about the precision of it. Her father's chest pain, real or induced by anxiety, deliberately manufactured by 2 men standing outside his building all morning. The call at 2 p.m., when she'd be in the kitchen and distracted and emotionally available to react before thinking. The suggestion of a water line, innocent enough to make her father open the door, specific enough to make him afraid to go outside. He's been watching longer than we thought, she said. Yes. He knows about my father. He knows about my schedule. He knows... She stopped. The thing she'd been about to say arranged itself into a shape she didn't want it to take. Roman, how does he know this much about me this fast? A silence. Not the tactical kind. Not the processing kind. The kind that means the person on the other end of the line already knows the answer and is deciding how to deliver it. Roman, there's something I need to tell you, he said. Not on the phone. I need you to stay at the restaurant until I get there. 2 hours. Tell me now. Maisie, tell me now, or I go to Hoboken myself and you can chase me across the river. A long pause. Not on the phone, he said. 2 hours. I promise you 2 hours. Yeah. He came in 1 hour and 40 minutes, which told her something about the severity of what he was carrying, because Roman Castelli was a man who managed time as a form of control, and arriving early was a concession he didn't make easily. He came into the restaurant through the kitchen entrance. He was not in a suit. He'd come from somewhere operational. She could tell by the jacket and the set of his shoulders, and the fact that he hadn't shaved since opening night. He looked like someone who had been awake for a long time, managing things that required the complete version of him. He looked at her. She looked at him. Sit down, she said. Maisie? Sit down, Roman. He sat at the small corner table in the kitchen where she took her breaks. She sat across from him. The evening prep was running on the other side of the pass, and Priya had the line, and the kitchen was doing its ordinary professional business around them, and none of it touched the table they were sitting at. "Tell me," she said. He set his phone on the table, face down. He looked at his hands for a moment, then he looked at her. "Sebastian has a source," he said, "inside my operation. Someone close enough to know your father's name and address, your schedule, the security arrangements I put in place after opening night. Someone who's been feeding him information for—" He stopped. "I've been running the timeline backward. It's been at least 6 weeks." 6 weeks? She did the math without wanting to. 6 weeks ago, she said slowly, I wasn't public yet. The campaign hadn't launched. The only people who knew about me were people inside your organization. Yes. So the source knew about me before anyone outside knew I existed. Yes? Which means the thing arranged itself further into its real shape. The source knew about me because of what I represent to you. Not publicly, personally. Roman was very still. Yes, he said. She sat with that for a moment. The kitchen went about its business. Somewhere on the line, someone dropped something metal, and it rang against the floor and was recovered, and ordinary life continued. Who? She said. I don't know yet. I have people working on it. Best guess? His jaw tightened. I don't make guesses about this. Roman, her voice was flat. Best guess. He looked at her for a long moment. There are 4 people who knew about you before the campaign launched, he said. Diane, my head of security, a man named Voss, my accountant, who's been with the family for 22 years, and he stopped. The stop was a different kind from the others, involuntary. And, she said, and my second, he said, Marco Reyes. He's been with me for 9 years. He was in the room the first night. He arranged the Monday meeting. He's handled the security coordination around the restaurant since the beginning. The name settled in the space between them. She watched Roman's face. It was doing the closed door thing, but the door wasn't entirely closed. There was something behind it that she could see in the small tension around his eyes, in the way his hands were flat on the table and very still, with the stillness of something being controlled rather than the stillness of something that is simply at rest. 9 years, she said. Yes. And you think it's him? I don't know. But you think it might be. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. She looked at the table. She thought about the photograph sent to her phone from an unknown number on opening night. The men outside her father's building, the precision of the access, not just her schedule and her father's address, but the texture of it, the knowledge of exactly which lever to pull and when. If it's Reyes, she said, what does that mean for the people you have watching me now? Roman's face changed. She watched it change and understood, in the moment before he answered, what she was about to be told. I pulled Reyes from your detail 2 hours ago, he said, without explanation. I've replaced everyone he selected with people from a different chain. So for the past 6 weeks, the security around you was partially designed by the man who may have been reporting your movements to Sebastian Morello. Yes. The kitchen was very loud suddenly. The ordinary sounds of prep, knives, heat, the refrigerator's hum, all of it amplified by the silence that had opened up at the table. Roman. She kept her voice steady with effort. The photograph on opening night, the men at my father's building today, those weren't random moves. No, he wasn't just watching. He was testing the security, testing what he could get close to. She looked at Roman directly. He was mapping access to me, and someone on the inside was confirming the map. Roman's hands, on the table, were no longer entirely still. Yes, he said. That's what I believe. She stood up. She needed to move. She went to the counter, turned on the tap, ran cold water over her wrists. An old habit, something she did when she needed her nervous system to slow down, and stood there for a moment with her back to him. She heard him stand. Maisie, give me a second. He gave her the second. She turned the tap off. She turned around. I want to see Reyes, she said. That's not... I want to see him. I want to be in the room when you talk to him. Maisie, this is not... He compromised my father, she said. Her voice was not loud. It was the opposite of loud, which in its own way carried more force. He put two men outside a 68-year-old man's apartment and scared him badly enough to cause a cardiac scare. He has been feeding information to someone who sent me a photograph through glass to tell me I can be found anywhere. I want to be in the room. Roman looked at her. She looked back. You won't like what you see, he said. I already don't like what I know, she said. Take me there. The room was in the basement level of a building she didn't know, in a part of Red Hook that looked, from the outside, like every other industrial block in Red Hook. Loading bays, security lights, the smell of the harbor 2 blocks over. She didn't ask questions about the room. She understood that the room was the kind of room that exists in the operational reality Roman inhabited, and that she had been choosing, in measured increments, to understand rather than avoid. Marco Reyes was already there when they arrived. He was seated at a metal table, hands in front of him, unrestrained but flanked. He was 41, she guessed, with a broad face and the kind of physical stillness that isn't peace but exhaustion. He'd been there a while. His jacket was off. There was a cup of coffee on the table he hadn't touched. He looked at Roman when they entered. He looked at Maisie. Something moved across his face that she catalogued and put away. Roman sat down across from him. Maisie stayed standing near the wall. Marco, Roman said. Just that. Reyes was quiet. I'm going to ask you once, Roman said, not because I'm giving you options, because you've been with me long enough that you deserve the question asked directly. His voice was completely flat. How long? Reyes looked at the coffee cup. 8 weeks, he said. The room absorbed it. 8 weeks. 2 weeks before the campaign launched, before anyone outside knew who Maisie Rowan was or what she meant. Why? Roman said. Reyes looked up. His eyes went to Maisie briefly, then back to Roman. My brother, he said. Morello's people picked him up in October. He runs a restaurant supply business in Queens, nothing connected, completely clean. They used him anyway. His voice was flat and tired and completely without self-pity, which was somehow worse than if it had contained some. They told me what they'd do to him if I didn't help. I believed them. I helped. Your brother, Roman said. Yes. You didn't come to me. Reyes looked at him. For the first time, something other than exhaustion came through. Something closer to grief, and closer to a man who has been living with a decision he knew was wrong from the moment he made it. He's my brother, he said, and I thought... He stopped. I thought I could manage it, feed them things that didn't matter, slow walk the useful stuff. I thought I could keep it contained. But you couldn't. No. Roman was quiet for a moment. The photograph, he said. Opening night. I gave them her phone number, Reyes said. I'm sorry. He didn't look at Maisie when he said it. He looked at the table. I gave them her number and her father's address and the security rotation schedule through the end of the month. The end of the month. 4 days away. She did the math. Roman did the math. She could see him do it. The small shift in his posture, the recalibration behind his eyes. The rotation through the end of the month, Roman said, which means they know every gap, Reyes said. Every window. I'm sorry. I am... His voice cracked once and then sealed back over. I tried to slow it down. I'm sorry. Roman stood. He stood slowly, the way a person stands when they need to control what their body does next. And he walked to the door and he said 2 words to the man standing outside it. And then he came back into the room and he looked at Maisie, and his face was the furthest from human she had ever seen it. Not cruel, not monstrous, just stripped completely of the things that made it readable, like something had been turned off behind it. We need to move, he said. Tonight, before the rotation turns over. Where? She said. Somewhere Reyes doesn't know about. His eyes went back to Reyes briefly and then away. Somewhere nobody does. Reyes said from the table, they're going to move on the girl before the rotation changes. Tonight or tomorrow morning. That's what the schedule gives them. They've been waiting for this window for 2 weeks. The room was very still. Maisie looked at Reyes. He met her eyes for the first time since she'd entered the room, and what she saw there was not someone asking for forgiveness. It was someone who knew exactly what he'd done and had been carrying the weight of it and was too tired to carry it anymore. She looked at Roman. How long do we have? She said. Roman's phone was already in his hand. Hours, he said. Maybe less. He was already dialing when her own phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. The message was 4 words. Tell him we called. She showed the screen to Roman. He looked at it. The muscle in his jaw moved once. They know you're with me right now, he said. How? Reyes. He looked at his second of 9 years, sitting at the table with his hands folded and his coffee untouched. Did you tell them about this meeting? Reyes closed his eyes. I had to check in at 8, he said. I missed the check-in. A missed check-in is a signal. He opened his eyes. I'm sorry, Roman. But Roman was already moving, already through the door, already on the phone, and Maisie was behind him in the corridor, and the corridor was cold and smelled of concrete and the harbor. And she understood with a full-body certainty that the next several hours were going to require her to be something she'd never had occasion to be before. Not the woman in the kitchen, not the woman in the campaign, not the face of something built from love and memory and good food, something harder. She thought about Mrs. Elena, sitting in her apartment in Little Italy, teaching a 9-year-old to cook, saying the secret is almost nothing, added at the right moment. A woman who had survived for 30 years in hiding, who had built a life from almost nothing, who had been found at the end anyway, and who had still managed to leave something real behind. Maisie had always thought the lesson was about cooking. She was starting to understand it was about surviving. Roman made 3 calls in the corridor, and she listened to all of them because there was no point in not listening. The first call was in a language she didn't recognize, short and precise. The second was in English, single syllables, coordinates she didn't know, a timeline measured in minutes. The third was to someone named Carver, who had been in her lobby, who was now apparently repositioning to somewhere Roman specified without explanation and without question. He ended the third call and looked at her. We're moving, he said. Where? A location Reyes has never been to, off every record I have. He was already walking toward the exit. You stay within arm's reach of me from this point. You don't go through a door before me. You don't stop moving unless I tell you to stop. Understood. He looked at her briefly, a full second look, the kind that takes inventory, and then pushed through the exit door into the cold. The alley behind the building was dark and smelled of salt and diesel. A car was already there, engine running, a man she didn't know behind the wheel. Roman put her in first, came in after her, and the car was moving before the door fully closed. She said nothing. He said nothing. The city moved past the windows at a speed slightly above legal, the driver navigating with the practiced efficiency of someone who knew these streets the way she knew her kitchen, by feel, by instinct, by the particular knowledge of where the gaps are. She thought about her father in a hospital in Hoboken. She thought about Reyes at a metal table with untouched coffee. She thought about 4 words on a phone screen. Tell him we called. They knew we were in that room, she said. Yes. Which means they've had eyes on you all day. Not just me. You. Yes. So wherever we're going, they don't know this car, Roman said. The driver is someone Reyes never met. The location is a property held under a name that doesn't connect to me through any channel Reyes had access to. He paused. It buys us time, not unlimited time. How much? Enough, he said. Which was not an answer, but she accepted it because he was the one who knew the dimensions of this, and she wasn't. The car drove for 22 minutes. She tracked the time on her phone because it was the only thing she could track. They ended up in a part of Brooklyn she knew geographically, but had no personal connection to. Industrial, waterfront adjacent, the kind of neighborhood that looked abandoned at night and was not. The building they entered was 5 stories, brick, with a freight entrance off an unmarked side street. Inside, bare concrete, functional lighting, the smell of a space that was maintained but not inhabited. Roman knew it without needing to be shown where things were. He moved through it with the ease of prior familiarity, leading her up 2 flights and into a room that was sparse but not uncomfortable. A table, chairs, a window overlooking the water that showed the lights of the harbor, and beyond it, lower Manhattan burning orange against the November sky. A man was already there. She didn't know him. Late 40s, compact, with the kind of face that had learned to communicate only what it chose to. Carver, Roman said. She's clean, Carver said, which she understood meant the car, the route, The arrival had been watched and confirmed unobserved. What's the window? They'll know the missed check-in by 9 at the latest. It's 8:12. Carver looked at Maisie briefly, then back at Roman. They're going to move fast when they move. Morello doesn't wait when a timeline collapses. I know. Roman sat down. He looked at the table. He looked like a man doing arithmetic in his head. Not numbers, but variables, contingencies. The particular calculation of someone managing a situation with too many moving parts and not enough controlled ones. Maisie sat down across from him. Tell me what he does, Mike, she said. When he moves. What does it look like? Roman looked at her. Force, he said. Concentrated and fast. He identifies the target, he identifies the window, and he hits it before anyone can adjust. He doesn't negotiate after. Negotiation is only before. Once he's moving, the only language is result. So if he decides to come for me tonight, he'll come for you directly. Not your father again, not another photograph. You. Because the only leverage left is having you physically in a place I can't reach, where the conversation about ports and territory and what I'm going to give him happens on his terms. She sat with that. Okay, she said. Okay, he repeated, in a tone that was not agreement but a question. I mean, okay, I understand what we're dealing with. I mean, okay, what's the plan? He looked at her for a moment. There are 12 men I trust completely. People Reyes never selected, never managed, never had access to. They're repositioning now to cover this building and 3 surrounding blocks. He laid his phone on the table, pulled up something she couldn't see from her angle. I have one move available, one that ends this without a prolonged escalation. But it requires me to leave this building. Leave. Sebastian needs to believe I'm reachable, that the situation with Reyes has rattled me enough that I'm moving to a secondary position he knows about. A property in Red Hook I've used before, that Reyes knew about, that Sebastian almost certainly has flagged as a fallback location. He looked at her. If I go there, he has a target he can read. He focuses there. It pulls resources away from me, she said. Yes. You use yourself as bait. I use myself as the more valuable target, which is what I am to him. His voice was even. The ports, the territory, the routes. Those are all tied to me, not to you. Your leverage. I'm the prize. If he believes he has a shot at taking both problems off the board simultaneously, he splits his attention. He splits his operation, and a split operation has gaps. She understood the logic. She also understood what the logic required, which was Roman Castelli walking into a building that Sebastian Morello was watching, alone or close to it, as a calculated invitation for a confrontation he may or may not survive. No, she said. Maisie, no. She kept her voice flat. You don't get to explain a plan where you walk into a building as bait, and then tell me to sit here while it plays out. That's not a plan I'm accepting. It's not a plan you accept or don't accept. Then tell me why I'm in this room if not because my agreement matters. He stopped. She looked at him. Your agreement matters, he said. That's different from your approval of every operational decision. Then here's what my agreement looks like. You don't go alone. Carver goes with you. You take enough people that the bait looks real but the trap has teeth, and you call me the moment it's done. That was already the plan. Then why did you frame it like I was going to object? Because... He stopped. He looked at the table for a moment. When he looked back up, something in his face had shifted. The professional distance of the past 2 hours giving way, briefly, to the person underneath it. Because I've been trying for 3 hours not to tell you that I am extremely aware of what happens if this goes wrong, and I have been managing that by focusing on logistics. The room was quiet. Outside, the harbor lights moved on the water. I know, she said. I need you to stay here, he said, with 2 men outside this room and Carver on the perimeter until I confirm. Can you do that? She looked at him steadily. Can you do your part? Yes. Then yes, she said. Go. He stood. He came around the table and stopped in front of her, and she stood too, because she wasn't going to have this moment sitting down. He put his hand against the side of her face briefly. The same gesture she'd given him in the kitchen that felt like a year ago but was 48 hours. And she held still under it and looked at him directly. An hour, he said. An hour, she said. And then I'm calling you. He left. 40 minutes passed. She sat at the table. She stood at the window. She sat at the table again. She was not someone who was good at waiting. She was someone who was good at working. And the difference between those two things had never been more apparent than in this room with no kitchen and no task, and nothing to do but track the time and listen to the building settle around her. At 8:52, one of the two men outside her door knocked once and came in. Miss Rowan. Professional. Careful. There's a situation. Everything in her chest relocated. What kind? Mr. Castelli's car was intercepted en route to the Red Hook property. There was an engagement. He paused. He's uninjured. Carver is handling the secondary response, but Morello's people... Another pause. They anticipated the move. They had more people than expected. Where is Roman right now? Managing the response at Red Hook. He's secure. That wasn't the question. Ms. Rowan. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. The number was one she'd never seen, and she almost didn't answer it. And then she thought about Sebastian Morello and the 4 words on her screen in Hoboken, and she answered it because not answering it was a choice with its own consequences. Ms. Rowan. The voice was smooth, warm, and exactly as she'd heard it in the restaurant. Studied pleasantness over something that wasn't pleasant at all. I hope you're comfortable. She said nothing. I'm going to assume Roman has explained broadly who I am, so we can skip that part. A pause. I want you to know that I have a great deal of respect for what you've built. The restaurant, the campaign, the way you've managed a situation that most people would find overwhelming. She stayed quiet. I also want you to know, Morello continued, that none of this has to do with you, not personally. You're a complication of Roman's own making, and I'm actually somewhat sorry about that. The warmth in his voice was remarkable, she thought, the kind that requires significant practice to maintain at that temperature. What I need is very simple. I need Roman to understand that his current position is not sustainable. I believe you can help him understand that. What do you want from me specifically? She said. I want you to call him, Morello said. Right now. I want you to tell him that you'd like to see him, that you need him to come to you, that's all. So he comes out of Red Hook. So we can have a direct conversation in a setting I control. Yes. And then what happens to me? A brief pause, calibrated for reassurance. You go home. You open your restaurant tomorrow. You serve excellent pasta to people who appreciate it. Your involvement in this ends tonight. She sat very still. Outside the window, the harbor was dark, and the city lights made the water look like something on fire. She thought about Roman's face when he'd said, I have been trying for 3 hours not to tell you that I am extremely aware of what happens if this goes wrong. She thought about 9 years and a missed check-in that was a signal. She thought about Reyes at the table saying, I'm sorry, Roman in the voice of someone who knew exactly what they'd done. Give me your number, she said. Another pause, shorter this time, the kind that means the person on the other end has registered something unexpected and is filing it. I beg your pardon. Your number. I want to call you back in 5 minutes. Ms. Rowan? Because I'm not going to call Roman from a number he doesn't recognize, she said. He'll see the unknown number and he'll know something is wrong and whatever you're planning won't work. Give me a number he's going to see and not react to. She kept her voice level. Unless you'd rather do this the hard way. A silence. Then Morello read her a number. She hung up. She looked at the man still standing near the door. I need Carver's direct line, she said. Right now. What happened in the next 8 minutes she would compress later into a sequence that felt, in memory, both faster and slower than it actually was. She called Carver and gave him Morello's number and said 3 sentences. Carver was quiet for 2 seconds, which she understood meant he was sending it somewhere. She asked him where Roman was and he said Red Hook. The building is contained, 2 down, nobody critical. She asked if he could get a message to Roman without using his phone. Carver said yes. She told him the message. Then she sat down at the table and waited again. At 9:17, the building's freight door opened 3 floors below. She heard it. The building's acoustics were specific. She'd learned them in the hour she'd been there the way she learned every room's acoustics, reflexively, as a form of situational awareness. Freight door, 3 floors below, and then footsteps that were not the footsteps of the men she'd been listening to all evening. The man near her door heard it too. He was on his earpiece immediately, quiet and rapid. She stood up. She looked at the window. She thought, the secret is almost nothing, added at the right moment, and then removed before anyone can taste it directly. The door to her room opened. Not her guard. Someone else. Broad, unhurried, with the loose economy of movement that belongs to people who are comfortable with physical confrontation. Behind him, another. And behind them, moving with the same studied pleasantness she'd heard on the phone, Sebastian Morello. He looked different in motion than he had in the restaurant doorway. Smaller, somehow. Or maybe she was just seeing him more clearly now. Not through the distortion of shock and surprise, but straight, in a room with no audience. "Miss Rowan?" he said. "Mr. Morello," she said. He looked around the room, at the table, the chairs, the window, at her. "You called back quickly." "I said 5 minutes." "You did." He moved further into the room with the ease of someone entering a space he considers already won. "I appreciate the professionalism. Some people," he gestured vaguely, "lose composure under pressure. You don't." "I cook for a living," she said. "Composure under pressure is the job." Something almost genuine moved through his expression. Amusement, maybe, or something adjacent to it. He sat down at the table. He looked at her in the considering way of a man who is deciding how much to respect something. "Call him," he said. "In a minute," she said. His eyes shifted. Small change. Small warning. "Ms. Rowan." "You told me Roman built something he couldn't protect," she said. "You're right about that. He built a restaurant that's been open 3 days, and it's already the best in the city, and he hasn't slept in a week. And he's been managing you with one hand while doing this with the other." She looked at Morello steadily. "But you misread what that means." "Did I?" "You thought it made him weaker. It didn't. It made him want to win for a different reason, which is a lot more dangerous than wanting to win for money." Morello's expression was patient and entirely closed. "Call him," he said. "He's already coming," she said. The room changed. It was a small change, the kind you feel in pressure rather than sound. Morello's 2 men moved, both of them, a slight repositioning. Morello himself was very still. "What did you do?" he said. "I called Carver," she said. "I gave him your number. I gave him this building." She looked at Morello without looking away. "I told them where I was, which is the one thing you didn't plan for because you were so sure I'd call Roman directly and get him out of Red Hook that you didn't consider I might do the opposite." Something went out of Morello's studied pleasantness. What replaced it was not rage. She'd half expected rage. What replaced it was calculation, fast and cold, the kind that compresses a situation to its remaining options in seconds. He stood up. "Get her up," he said to the man on his left. The man moved toward her. And Maisie, who had never in her life done anything that could be described as a violent act, who had cooked her way through every difficult situation she'd ever encountered and had no particular training in anything that was about to be relevant, looked at the distance between herself and the window and made a decision in the half-second available to make it. She threw the table. Not elegantly. It wasn't elegant. It was desperation physics. The table between her and Morello's man flipping on its side with a crash that was enormous in the confined space. It didn't stop him. It slowed him, which was the only thing she needed it to do, because in the 2 seconds of recalibration it bought her, she crossed to the window and hit the glass with her elbow. Once, twice, and the 3rd time it went through. Cold air, sudden and absolute. She screamed. Not words, just sound. As loud as her lungs could produce, into the November air above a Red Hook street, in a building where Roman Castelli's people were supposedly already repositioning, and which would mean nothing or everything depending entirely on whether she had read the situation correctly. The man's hand closed on her arm and pulled her back from the window. She hit the floor hard, left knee, left palm, and the pain was immediate and bright, and she felt it in her back teeth, but she did not stop moving. She got one hand on the overturned table and used it to push herself up, and she was up, off the floor, heart going at a rate she could hear in her ears. Morello was looking at her. The pleasantness was completely gone. What was underneath it was something she'd suspected all along, but not monstrous, just utterly indifferent, the face of a man to whom people are variables rather than people. Get the rope, he said. The second man moved, and then the freight door 3 stories below opened again, and this time the footsteps were different. More of them, faster, with the concentrated urgency of people moving toward a target and not trying to be quiet about it anymore. Morello heard it. He looked at the door. He looked at Maisie. She was standing in the middle of the room with blood on her palm from the window glass, and her knee radiating pain, and her heart conducting what felt like a full orchestral piece inside her chest. And she was looking at him with the steadiness of someone who has made every choice available to them and is now standing on the other side of those choices waiting to see what they've bought. "You're not what I expected," Morello said. "No," she said. "I'm not." The door to the room burst open. Not Morello's people. The other kind, moving fast and with purpose, Carver first and then 2 others she didn't know, filling the room's geometry with controlled force in the way of people who have trained for exactly this configuration. Morello's 2 men made brief professional assessments and reached brief professional conclusions. Morello himself did not reach for anything. He stood, with his hands visible, with the composure of a man who has been in losing positions before and understands that certain performances must be maintained even when the outcome has been decided. He looked at Maisie one more time. "Tell Roman," he said, "that this isn't finished." "Tell him yourself," she said. Carver stepped forward. She turned away. Her knee was going to be an extraordinary problem in approximately 10 minutes when the adrenaline finished metabolizing, but right now she walked to the blown-out window on her own power and stood in the cold air coming through it and looked out at the harbor, the lights, the permanent indifferent beauty of the city at night, and breathed. Her phone rang. She already knew who it was. She answered it. "I heard the window," Roman said. His voice was different from any version of it she'd heard before, stripped of everything except the one thing underneath all of it. "Maisie, talk to me." "I'm standing," she said. "Knees bad. Hands cut. I'm standing." A silence that was brief and total and contained a great deal. "I'm 3 minutes out," he said. "I know," she said. "Don't move. Roman." She looked at the city. Her hand was starting to hurt properly now, the cut on her palm making itself known with the persistent insistence of damage that has been ignored as long as it can be. "I'm not going anywhere." She heard the car. She heard the freight door. She heard his footsteps on the stairs, which she recognized. She'd learned them in the weeks of evenings in the kitchen, the way she'd learned everything that mattered. By paying attention, by being present, by showing up before dawn and staying after dark, and refusing to treat the thing in front of her as less important than the thing she was afraid of. The door opened. He came in fast and stopped when he saw her. She turned from the window. He crossed the room in 4 strides and his hands were on her face, and he was looking at her with an expression she had no previous reference for. Something that was past relief, past anger at the situation, past everything managed. Just the raw fact of it, of her standing in front of him. "Your hand," he said. "It's fine." "It's not fine, there's—" "Roman." She put her uninjured hand against his chest. His heart was going fast under her palm. "I'm okay." He exhaled. One long, complete exhale, like a structure releasing pressure it had been holding past its design limit. He pulled her in, not gently, the kind of holding that is not about tenderness, but about physics, about the fact that the body sometimes requires confirmation that something real is present, and the only confirmation available is contact. She let him because she needed it too, because her knee was starting to truly hurt, and her hand was bleeding on his jacket, and the adrenaline was fully metabolizing now into something that felt, in its aftermath, extraordinarily close to grief. She pressed her face against his shoulder. "Morello," she said, muffled. "Carver has him." "He said it's not finished." "He's wrong," Roman said. His voice was very quiet and very certain. "He's wrong." She believed him, not because she had evidence, because she'd spent 3 months in proximity to this man learning to read the difference between what he performed and what he meant, and this was what he meant. She breathed in. She breathed out. Her knee was going to need attention. Her hand needed stitches, probably. The restaurant had service tomorrow night, and she had a full prep list and a team that would be worried and a menu that was finally right. Finally. Right after weeks of almost. She didn't let herself finish the thought. She stood up straight, away from his shoulder, and looked at her hand, The cut across the palm, not deep enough for serious damage, but bleeding with the particular persistence of palm cuts, which have no interest in being ignored. She pressed her sleeve against it. "I need to sit down," she said. "Yes," he said. "You do." The hospital was not a conversation she won. Roman drove her himself, which told her something about the state of things. He was a man who was driven always, who sat in the back of cars and managed the world from there. And the fact that he was behind the wheel at 10:30 p.m., taking her to a hospital in Brooklyn, meant that the world he usually managed from the back of cars had, for the moment, contracted to the size of this vehicle and the two people in it. She didn't argue about the hospital because her hand had stopped being ignorable, and her knee had swollen to a size that made the trouser leg tight, and she was 35 years old and had enough respect for her body to understand when it was telling her something. The emergency room was the ordinary chaos of a Friday night. Not a place Roman Castelli typically occupied, she suspected, though he navigated it without visible discomfort, which told her either that he had more range than his usual environment suggested, or that he had learned long ago to be functional in whatever room he was placed in. 6 stitches in the palm. Knee bruised, not broken. She'd gotten lucky with the fall, or unlucky, depending on how you measured luck in a room where you'd just thrown a table at a man. She sat on the hospital bed while a resident worked on her hand, and Roman sat in the chair in the corner and said nothing. He was on his phone intermittently. She could see from the quality of his attention that the situation with Morello was being managed, that Carver was sending updates, that the operational machinery he ran was processing what had happened and producing consequences. But he kept coming back to her, checking, in the way of someone who cannot fully put their attention elsewhere until they've confirmed a thing is still there. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, to the wall, to the room, to him. He put his phone down. "I know," he said. "You keep looking at me like you need to confirm I'm real." "I do," he said, simply. No qualification. The resident finished with her hand and gave her instructions she already knew and would follow approximately 70% of. She got off the bed. Her knee held. Roman was at her elbow before she'd fully stood, not taking her weight but present in case she needed it, and she thought, in the specific, exhausted clarity that follows extended adrenaline, that this was who he was, underneath the empire and the silence and the 20 years of walls. Present. When it mattered, simply and completely present. "Take me home," she said. "Maisie, my home. The Bronx." She looked at him. "I need my own bed and my own kitchen and approximately 10 hours of sleep. Tomorrow, I have service." He stared at her. "You have stitches in your hand," he said. "I'm right-handed," she said. "The stitches are in my left." A silence in which he appeared to be deciding whether to argue this. "Take me home," she said again, quieter. "And tomorrow, when this is all, when you've dealt with whatever needs dealing with, come and find me, okay?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," he said. He took her home. She slept 9 hours and 40 minutes, which was more continuous sleep than she'd had in 3 weeks, and woke to the specific quality of morning light that means it's later than you intended, and the city has been at work for hours without you. Her hand throbbed with a clean, honest pain. Her knee was a deep purple from mid-cap to below the joint. She stood in her bathroom and looked at both of them in the mirror for a moment. The damage, the evidence of last night, the body's record of decisions made. And then she got in the shower and washed her hair and put on clean clothes and went to the kitchen to make coffee. Her kitchen, 40 square feet. One window looking at the brick face of the building across the alley. A stove with a burner that ran slightly hot, which she'd learned to compensate for. Pots hanging from a rack she'd installed herself because there was no storage. A cutting board her mother had given her, worn in the middle from years of use, which she kept because wear in the middle means a cutting board has been loved. She stood at the stove and made coffee, and then she made eggs simply in olive oil, the way Mrs. Elena had taught her before she taught her anything more complicated. "Start simple," the old woman had said. "The simple things reveal everything." She ate standing at the counter because her table was small, and eating at it alone always made the apartment feel emptier than it was. Her phone had 17 messages. She read the ones from Priya. The kitchen was fine. The team had been briefed only that there had been a family situation, service was being managed. She would handle prep until Maisie arrived, and felt a particular gratitude that was so large it was almost uncomfortable. She texted back, "I'll be there by 4. Don't let anyone touch the Branzino prep." Priya responded in 40 seconds. "Already protecting it. How are you?" Maisie looked at the question for a moment. "Getting there," she wrote. "Make sure the pasta water is salted properly." "Chef," Priya responded, which contained in that single word everything that needed to be said. She was in the kitchen by 3:45. The team registered her arrival. The stitch line on her left hand, the slight unevenness in her walk that the knee imposed, the specific quality of someone who has been through something and has decided consciously to be here anyway. Nobody asked. This was a professional courtesy she appreciated deeply because she didn't have the language for it yet, and she needed the kitchen to be the kitchen, which was the one place where the parameters were always clear. She walked the line. She tasted everything. She sent back a sauce that was close but not right, without apology, because the standard did not change based on what had happened to her hand. Priya appeared at her shoulder. "The pasta," Priya said. "I want you to taste it." She tasted it. It was right, completely right. The pasta had the texture it needed, and the sauce had the balance she'd been calibrating for weeks, and the finish, the ghost of chocolate and charred citrus, present but not identifiable, the thing that made people say this is different, this is something without knowing why, was exactly where it needed to be. She set the spoon down. "Good," she said. Priya nodded once, went back to the station. Maisie stood at the pass and looked at the kitchen running. Her kitchen, her people, her food, and let herself have 30 seconds of something that wasn't quite pride but was adjacent to it. The kind of feeling that comes not from the result but from the cost of the result, from knowing exactly what it took and having paid it fully. 30 seconds. Then, "Let's go. We've got a full house." Roman came at 9, not to the kitchen, to the dining room, which he'd never done before. He'd always come through the back, through the service entrance, into her space. Tonight he came through the front door like a guest, and Diane seated him at the corner table, the one she could see through the kitchen glass from the pass, and he sat alone with a glass of water and watched the room. She saw him when the ticket rush slowed enough to look up. He was watching the dining room with the expression she associated with the restaurant at its best. Not satisfaction exactly, but recognition. The thing you see on someone's face when the world has produced something that matches an internal image they've held for a long time. She finished service. She cleaned the pass herself, the way she always did, because the pass is the chef's territory, and you don't leave it to someone else. She checked every station. She debriefed the line with Priya, what held, what could be better, what they were adjusting for tomorrow. She washed her hands at the sink, carefully around the bandaging on her left. Then she went out to the dining room. She sat down across from him. He looked at her. The hand, the walk, the general appearance of someone who had slept adequately and cooked a full service and was running on something other than adrenaline for the first time in days. "How's the knee?" he said. "Functional," she said. "How's Morello?" He was quiet for a moment. "In federal custody as of this morning. The number I gave Carver, your number, the one you got from him, it tied to a cell tower that put him at the Red Hook location during the incident with my men 3 nights ago. Combined with what Reyes gave us in exchange for reduced exposure," he stopped. "It builds a case the federal attorneys have been trying to build for 6 years. They moved fast." She thought about Morello standing in that room saying, "Tell Roman this isn't finished," with his studied pleasantness finally fully gone. "Reyes," she said, cooperating fully. "His brother is unharmed." Roman looked at the table. "I'm not going to tell you what I feel about what Reyes did. It's complicated, and it's going to stay complicated. But his brother is safe, and the information he provided will matter. And—" He stopped. 9 years is 9 years. It doesn't disappear because of one bad decision made under the wrong kind of pressure. She looked at him. "That's more generous than I expected," she said. "He's not the first person to make a terrible choice to protect someone he loved," Roman said. He said it evenly, without emphasis, but she heard what was inside it, the history of it, the personal geography of a man who had spent his adult life in a world where exactly that kind of terrible choice was the daily currency. "What happens now," she said, "to you, to the operation?" He looked at the dining room. The last few tables were finishing. the low voices of people reluctant to end good evenings, the servers moving quietly, the candlelight that Maisie had specified because overhead lighting had no place in a room meant to feel like the inside of a memory. The ports, he said. The routing, the things Morello wanted. I've been thinking about them, about why someone like him could see them as leverage. He was quiet for a moment. The legitimate business is real. The restaurants, the hotels, the hospitality group, it's real, and it runs, and it's profitable, and it employs people who are building actual lives. He looked back at her. The other part has been a structure I inherited and maintained because that's what you do with structures you inherit, unless you decide differently. Are you deciding differently? She said. I've been deciding differently for about 3 months, he said. I just didn't have a name for it until recently. She looked at him steadily. That's not a small thing, she said. No, he agreed. It's not. It takes time. It's not, you don't dismantle something like that in a conversation. I know. And there are people who won't accept it, who'll push back or create problems or decide your decision is an opportunity. I know that too. And I'm not... She stopped. She looked at the table for a moment, gathering the sentence into its honest shape. I'm not going to tell you it doesn't matter to me, what it is and what it's been. I'm not that detached. She looked up. But I'm also not going to tell you it makes you a person I can't, that it closes something. She paused. You're not the operation. You're not what you inherited. I've been watching you for 3 months and I know the difference. He was very still. Maisie, he said. I know, she said. I know what you're going to say. I don't think you do. You're going to say this is complicated, and that you don't want to make promises you can't verify yet, and that the situation is still unresolved in ways that might... I was going to say, he said, that I haven't been this afraid of anything since I was 16 years old and found out my mother was gone. The dining room was almost empty now. One table in the far corner, a couple so absorbed in their conversation they were unaware of the restaurant slowly folding around them. Maisie was quiet for a moment. What were you afraid of at 16? She said, gently. The way you ask a question you want the real answer to. That the thing that made the world bearable had been permanently removed, he said. That I'd spend the rest of my life in a world that didn't have it in it anymore. He looked at her directly. I spent 20 years being right about that. And then you walked through a service entrance and spilled pasta on my floor. She looked at him. Something in her chest did what it had been doing for weeks, which was insisting on being felt whether or not she had the bandwidth for it. I'm not your mother, she said. Carefully, because this mattered. I'm not a replacement for what you lost. I'm not going to be that for you, and you can't ask me to be. I know that, he said. I'm not asking for that. Then what are you asking? He looked at her across the corner table in the restaurant. His mother's name was written above, in a room that smelled of the evening's cooking and the particular warmth of a space that has been filled with people and is slowly returning to itself. I'm asking if you'll stay, he said. Not for the restaurant, not for the campaign or the menu or any of the professional... He stopped. I'm asking if you, specifically you, Maisie Rowan, who gets to work before dawn and argues with me about food and threw a table at a man twice her size last night. He stopped again. Something in his face that was not the control, not the managed version, but the thing the control existed to protect. I'm asking if you'll stay. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about Mrs. Elena in her small kitchen on Mulberry Street, who had spent 30 years building a life from nothing, in hiding, under a name that wasn't hers, and who had still managed to teach a lonely child that food was the only honest thing. That you couldn't fake a good meal, that the secret was almost nothing, added at the right moment, and that what it left behind was not the ingredient itself, but the effect of it, the thing that made someone say, this is different, this is something without being able to name exactly why. She thought about what it meant to love something enough to protect it, even imperfectly, even at great cost, even when the protection itself required becoming something complicated. She thought about her palm, stitched and bandaged, and her kitchen running clean and true, and the 4 stars in the Times, and the woman at table 12 who had cried. She thought about the way Roman Castelli sat on the counter and watched her cook, and didn't try to fill the silence, and the way he said she would have liked you, and the way he'd driven her to the hospital himself. Yes, she said. Just that. He exhaled, the same complete exhale she'd heard in the Red Hook building, the structural release of something held past its limit. And for a moment, he simply looked at her with the expression of a man who has received something he stopped expecting. Then she reached across the table, her good hand, and set it over his. He turned his hand and held hers. The last table in the corner finally stood to leave. The server brought their coats with a quiet efficiency that Maisie had trained into her team, present without intruding, attentive without performing. The couple left. The door opened and closed, and the restaurant was empty except for the kitchen staff finishing the clothes and the two people at the corner table. "I'm going to need a few weeks," she said eventually, "to hire a sous chef who can run the pass on the nights I'm not here, because I intend to sometimes not be here." "Priya," Roman said. "I was thinking Priya. She's already running the pass when you're not looking." "I know," Maisie said. "I'm letting her get used to it." He looked at her. Something moved through his expression that was, she was fairly sure, the closest thing to lightness she'd seen on his face. "You planned this months ago," he said. "I plan everything," she said. "It's a kitchen. You plan or you fail." "And the rest of it," he said. "Not the kitchen, the rest." She looked at him steadily. "I don't plan everything," she said. "Some things you just cook until they're ready. You don't rush it. You don't force it. You pay attention and you adjust, and eventually you know." He was quiet. "And do you know?" he said. "Yes," she said. "I know." The weeks that followed were not simple. Nothing about dismantling the parts of an organization that have been operational for 2 decades is simple, and Roman did not pretend otherwise. There were legal processes and financial restructuring and conversations with people who needed to be handled carefully and people who needed to be handled differently. There were federal attorneys who became aware of his cooperation in the Morello case and who subsequently had interest in certain other matters, and there were negotiations that were complicated and long. He did not hide any of it from her. This was not something she asked for. He simply did it, told her what was happening, what it cost, what the timeline looked like, in the same direct way he'd told her about Sebastian Morello that first night in the kitchen. Not unburdening, not asking her to carry it. Informing. Treating her as someone with the right to know the facts of the life she'd decided to enter. She appreciated it more than she had words for, and she told him so once, plainly, and he nodded and said, "I know how to keep secrets, and I know what it costs." And she understood that this was the most intimate thing he'd said to her yet, the admission that he'd chosen to stop keeping this particular one. Reyes pled to a reduced charge. His brother's restaurant supply business in Queens continued operating. Maisie saw Marco Reyes once, across a lobby, 3 months after the night in Red Hook, and he looked like someone who had set something down that had been very heavy for a long time. They didn't speak. She held the door for him on her way out. He nodded. That was enough. Her father recovered fully from the anxiety event in Hoboken. She took him to dinner at Casa Belladonna on a Sunday in January, before service, when the restaurant was quiet and she could sit with him in the dining room and let him eat the pasta and watch his face when he tasted it. He was quiet for a long moment after the first bite. "Maisie," he said, "this tastes like—" "I know," she said. He looked at her. His eyes were doing something that 68-year-old men who have raised daughters alone for 20 years are not generally comfortable with. "It tastes like when you were small," he said, "before everything got hard." She reached across the table and covered his hand. "The woman who taught me," she said. "She knew what food was for." He nodded. He ate slowly, with the focused appreciation of someone who understands they are receiving something real. She let him eat and didn't fill the silence and thought about an old woman's kitchen and a recipe that had traveled from Naples to Little Italy to a 42nd floor boardroom to this table, carrying everything it was supposed to carry and nothing extra. Bashit. The campaign ran through the winter and into spring. The images of Maisie, in the kitchen, at the market, sitting at the counter in the early morning light, appeared in the kind of publications that had spent the fall mocking Roman's decision. The food world's response had shifted the conversation, and then the Times Review had shifted it further, and then something happened that no marketing strategy can manufacture, which is that people started sharing the photographs not because they were aspirational, but because they were recognizable. Because the woman in them looked like someone they knew, Someone who showed up and worked and made things with her hands and didn't ask to be elevated before she'd earned it. The fashion industry's consensus evolved at the pace that industries evolve, which is to say reluctantly and without acknowledging the evolution. The 10 supermodels moved on to other campaigns. Some of them became famous for other things. One of them, a woman named Cara, who had stood near the windows on that October night, looking at the skyline as though she owned part of it, sent a brief email through her agency 6 months later that said simply, "I've eaten at the restaurant 3 times. The pasta is extraordinary. Please pass on my compliments to the chef." Maisie read it standing at the pass and felt something like the satisfaction of a completed circuit. Not triumph, not vindication, just the quiet, particular pleasure of something that had been doubted being confirmed by the doubter. She responded, "Thank you. Come back in spring. We're doing something new with the menu." Cara came in April. She brought her mother. Petit. On a night in March, after service, Maisie was in the kitchen doing the thing she did at the end of every night. The last check of the pass, the walk of the line, the confirmation that the kitchen was clean and ready and that tomorrow could begin from a position of readiness. When Roman appeared in the doorway, he had something in his hand. She looked at it. It was a frame, simple, dark wood, and inside it, under glass, the Times Review. The paragraph in the middle, an act of memory made edible. She looked at him. "I said we could frame it at the restaurant," he said. She took it. She looked at the paragraph, the specific sentences, the words that meant what they meant because the food was what it was. "Where?" she said. He pointed to the wall near the kitchen entrance, the wall that was visible from both the dining room and the kitchen that existed on the threshold between the two spaces, between the seen and the unseen work, between the result and the cost of the result. She hung it there herself. She stepped back and looked at it. It was in the right place. "Roman," she said. "Yes. I want to show you something." She went to the station at the far end of the prep line, the one she used for development work, testing new dishes, calibrating things that weren't ready yet, the private work that happened after everyone else had gone home. She picked up a small bowl she'd covered with a cloth. She brought it to him. He looked at it, at her. "New dessert," she said, "for the spring menu. I've been working on it for 6 weeks." She took the cloth off. It was simple, visually, completely simple. A small, shallow bowl of something pale and smooth. On top, almost nothing. A thin strip of something dark, curled at the edge. A single fragment of walnut. 3 drops of amber, which was honey. "Taste it," she said. He picked up the spoon. He tasted it. She watched his face. It did the same thing it had done the first time. The first time in a boardroom when the smell from her thermos had stopped him mid-stride. The small release behind the eyes, the jaw moving once, processing something that was more than flavor. He set the spoon down. He was quiet for a moment. "What is it?" he said. His voice was even, but she heard what was under it. "Honey and ricotta," she said. "The chocolate is in the base, not on top, underneath. You can't see it. And the citrus is charred and then strained out before serving. It's not there when you eat it, just the effect of it." He looked at the bowl. "She taught you this?" he said. "She taught me the principle," Maisie said. "The rest I figured out myself." She looked at him directly. "The secret is almost nothing, added at the right moment. You can't taste it directly, but it changes everything around it." He looked at her. Outside, March was doing what March does in New York. Rain against the windows, the city running with it, the particular sound of a wet night in a place that keeps moving regardless. Inside, the kitchen was clean and the pass was empty, and the frame was on the wall where it belonged. He reached out. He tucked a strand of hair back from her face, the way you do with something you've decided belongs to your hands, and she stood still under it the way she had that first time, in the Red Hook building, when everything had been on the edge of going very wrong, and they had both known it. "Put it on the spring menu," he said. "I already did," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. The kitchen held the silence between them with the ease of a space that has held harder things and come through them intact, and outside the March rain came down against the glass, and New York moved past in its permanent, indifferent rush, and inside this room that smelled of the evening's best work and the ghost of chocolate and charred citrus. 2 people who had found each other sideways through grief and food and a freight elevator that didn't work, stood on the warm side of something they'd both stopped expecting. She had walked through a service entrance on an October night with 40 pounds of chafing equipment and a thermos of pasta she'd made herself and no expectation of anything beyond $140 and a long ride home on the subway. She had carried with her, without knowing it, the last surviving piece of a dead woman's recipe, and a quality of presence that turned out to be the only thing capable of breaking through 20 years of very carefully constructed walls, and the specific stubbornness of someone who refuses to let go of a thing worth holding, simply because holding it is hard. She was not the most beautiful woman who had stood in this building. She was not the most famous, or the most strategic, or the most carefully positioned. She was the one who was real. And in the end, in the specific arithmetic of this specific man's life, that had made every difference there was to make. Roman Castelli, who had feared nothing for 20 years, who had built walls and empires and kept himself on the right side of both, reached out and took her hand. The good one, not the stitched one, though he would have taken that one too, and held it with the completeness of someone who has finally identified the thing worth protecting and intends to do it properly this time. She let him. Outside the rain, inside the warmth, and above the kitchen door, in a simple dark frame, an act of memory made edible, a description so accurate it was almost the whole story. Almost. The whole story was this: a woman who knew what food was for, in a kitchen that finally knew her name.